little sick. So with the recent expose of Rotten Tomatoes and how some of their critics are actually being paid off, I decided to take a step back from movie rating websites. Stuff like Letterboxd and IMDb and obviously Rotten Tomatoes. But within doing so, I found myself asking, how exactly do we rate movies? And why do we rate movies the way that we do? I don't know about you guys, but it feels like I see an average movie review less and less these days. Everything that gets clicks or views or whatever are the extremes. A movie is either good or bad. Gone are the days where a movie can just be fine or okay. If a movie is just okay or average or even a little underwhelming, people tend to label it bad or even complete dog shit. Prime example being DC's The Flash. I made a video all about how overhated and over-exaggerated the negatives of that movie were, and if you want to watch it, I'll put a link for it in the description below. Or if a movie is pretty good or even great, people will for some reason just upgrade that to masterpiece status. Films that come to mind for that are Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, Barbie, and even Oppenheimer. Were they good movies? Absolutely. I'd even say that they were all very good movies. But do I think that they're amazing? In certain aspects, for sure, yeah. But as a whole, I can't consider them masterpieces like the rest of the internet seems to think. And I'm not trying to be different here, but I felt as though those movies had faults, and I can't help but acknowledge them when rating them. Which I guess does make me different, oh well. And to circle back around to Rotten Tomatoes, I think a big part of the issue with film criticism today, and just how people view movies in general, is due to how people perceive the percentage scores. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but I'm also willing to bet a lot of you don't, that a Rotten Tomato percentage is not how the movie stands in a 1 to 10 scale. Like, just because a movie has an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes doesn't mean it's an 8 out of 10 or an 80 out of 100. That just means that 80% of reviewers gave the movie a positive score. And that positive score can be anything from a 3 to 5 or a 5 out of 5 or a 4 out of 4 or whatever, because Rotten Tomatoes, they have weird grading scales. I don't know. Regardless, I can't help but feel like Rotten Tomatoes feels one of the worst things about movie ratings. And it's the ability to actually manipulate how people feel about a movie. Like, have you ever found yourself talking to someone about a movie and they say, I was interested in it, but I saw the reviews for it and decided to pass? That is such a bummer to me, because if you were personally interested in it, why would you let somebody else's opinion persuade you? Chances are, too, that you don't even know any of the people scoring the movie on those movie rating websites. So how would you even know that you align with their own opinions and biases?
That's a label, too. These are just all labels. You just label everything. That's so fucking lazy. You don't even know what that is. You don't. You know why? Because you can't see this thing if you don't know how to label it. There's nothing in here about technique. There's nothing in here about structure. Nothing in here about intention. It's just a bunch of crappy opinions backed up by even crappier comparisons.
I think a good way to combat this is by simply finding a reviewer that you personally find yourself agreeing with often. Like, for example, my personal go-tos have always been Chris Stuckman, Jeremy Johns, and Dan Murrell on YouTube. Been that way for years, and even though I don't always agree with what they have to say, I oftentimes find myself aligning with their views on movies. And no, this is not an echo chamber situation. It's just that certain people feel certain ways about certain movies. A lot of certains, not one sentence. I at least think it's better to give more weight to reviewers that have similar sensibilities and thoughtful opinions than to some random number that you see online. Because that number can't possibly quantify everything right or wrong about a movie. To get on top of my soapbox a little here, movies are art. But at the same time, they're also an act of measurable skill and technique. That's why there's such a noticeable difference between a student film and a professional film. It's not just because of budget, but it's because of technique and intention. You can rate the techniques and the physical performances or whatever, but you can only critique the art. Ratings are incredibly useful and can be used as a tool, and they're probably most useful to those who don't watch a shit ton of movies on the regular and don't necessarily involve themselves with every aspect of filmmaking. And I don't expect the average once-a-month moviegoer to care about every facet of cinema or filmmaking. They just want something they know is going to be worth the ever-ballooning price of a movie ticket. And I don't fault them at all for relying on movie ratings for the things they watch. Like, for example, food. An average person isn't going to know which ingredient is best or which spices go well with every dish. So instead, they'll go ask a friend or their mom or look at a cookbook or a recipe online. Whereas someone who's more experienced will know right away which spices go with each dish. They know the intricacies that go into these dishes and know exactly why they like it, beyond that it just tastes good. Same goes for movies, like for example, David Fincher, since he's got a new movie coming out. The moment they announced The Killer, I knew I wanted to see it, regardless of whatever reviews are out, whether they're good or bad. I'm gonna see that movie anyway, because I like David Fincher movies. I like the way he paces his stories, how dark and somber they often are, the editing and bleak aesthetics, the visceral impending doom that you feel when you watch his movies. And I'm sure you have a filmmaker of your own that you feel the same way for. You don't need the approval of some arbitrary number online to persuade you to see the movie. Just read the synopsis, and if it sounds cool, go watch it if you want to. And if you went out on a whim and watched a movie but didn't like it, that's perfectly fine. It's totally fine to not like a movie, regardless how others feel about it. But unfortunately, I've seen plenty of that toxicity online, where if someone doesn't like Barbie or Oppenheimer, for example, they're hit with the, just say you didn't get it. Just say you only watch Marvel movies or movies with shit tons of CGI. As if that's wrong. Who cares if someone didn't like Oppenheimer because of how much talking there was, or because it wasn't what they expected? That's fine. People are allowed to dislike things. Your opinion isn't more valuable and more correct just because you enjoyed a movie everybody else did. Same way your opinion isn't less valuable if you dislike a movie everybody else liked. And I think that's part of why I can't trust reviews anymore. I can't trust critic scores, apparently, because a portion of them are bought off. And I can't necessarily trust audience scores either, because how many of them are gatekeepers and self-proclaimed cinephile elitists? People who don't actually know how to critique a movie other than it was bad, or that the writing was bad, or that the CGI was bad, without actually even being able to explain what that means. Just because a story is generic and by the numbers doesn't mean that it's bad. The same way that just because a story is different and subverts expectations doesn't mean that it's good or bad either. Those same people are the ones that are quick to call a movie either a masterpiece or downright awful, without being able to see the irony in either of those statements.
You are why the mystery has been drained from our art. You see that now, don't you?
Basically, what I'm just trying to get at is that there's no right or wrong way to look at a movie. But what I do think is wrong is imposing your own opinions and viewpoints onto other people for how they feel about a movie. I think that is definitely wrong. I think Ethan Hawke says it the best. And if you haven't seen this interview, please watch it. It's not very long.
All right, I love superhero movies. I like every kind of movie. I don't think there's a difference between high art and low art. There are movies that people put their heart into, and there are movies that people try to cash in on. And the ones that I like are the ones that people put their heart into. And you can feel it in a superhero movie, or you can feel it in a horror movie, or you can feel it in some art house movie. Our country turns everything into a competition. They want to tell you what's its score on Rotten Tomatoes, how much box office did it make. And when I was growing up, those things didn't exist, and you could just absorb a movie for how it meant to you. There's no game to win. You know, that's not what art is.
So, because of the extremes in the film criticism sphere, I thought I'd try to break down how I personally think a fair 1 to 10 grading scale looks like. And I mean, I've been basically talking shit the whole video, so I might as well back it up with how I feel about movies. Plus, I'm also just starting a new series on this channel where I rewatch and rate every MCU movie to see if they still hold up all these years later, and I'll be using this same grading scale in those videos. So be sure to subscribe and stick around for those next week. And of course, this is just my opinion. Nothing I say here is above anybody else's or is fact or gospel. But I do feel like how we rate movies out of 10 is kind of unfair these days. So let's try to bring the ratings that we see online and the numbers that we throw out to movies back to ground level. So I'll be stacking these movies up on a 1 to 10 grading scale, and I will try to make the scale as objective as possible. So let's start off with 1, total unwatchable garbage. But I actually don't think I've ever seen a 1 out of 10 movie, though, in my entire life. So I doubt we'll be running into this anytime soon. I also just don't really believe that any film is worthless or garbage. That's not really how I see movies. Just know it's the absolute bottom of the barrel. 2 is just plain bad. Potentially even day ruining. Even if you watch something like this with some friends, there wouldn't be any kind of redeeming qualities. You and anyone else who unfortunately tagged along for the viewing experience will be bored, annoyed, and maybe even upset by the end, and most certainly worse off by watching it. 3 is a movie that's just hard to sit through. There's maybe 1 or 2 scenes that are cool and interesting enough to stick in your mind, you know, to keep you there enduring the movie till the credits. But other than that, it's just a very hard and tedious watch. 4 is very similar to 3, just slightly better, I guess. It's not awful, but it's not good either. That's really all I can say for 4. Now here's where things get going. I view a 5 out of 10 as the epitome of an average movie. You watch it once, and then probably never again. You didn't hate your time watching it, you weren't bored, but you also really weren't too engaged or in love with what was happening. You're not even sure if you'd recommend it to someone that you know. It was just an average time. You're thankful for the viewing experience, maybe you even had some fun, but you'll probably never think about it again. The truest form of a one-and-done movie. These are decent to good movies. I think a 6 is something that you enjoyed, but wouldn't watch again on your own, but would with friends under certain circumstances. I also think these are movies that you could possibly recommend to someone who's interested. Like if someone said to you, hey, I heard this movie's kind of alright, but I'm on the fence about watching it, you'd probably tell them, check it out then if you're interested. You might like it. It's a movie where you're never really bored, and you'll probably find yourself having a good time with. Like I said, decent to a good movie. I think a 7 is a very good movie. It has its problems just like any other film on the list, but the positives far outweigh the negatives, and the movie overall is a very enjoyable time. One that you'll find yourself coming back to fairly often. It's a movie that you'll think about for days, and one that you'll certainly recommend to others. An 8 is just a straight up great movie. I'd even say an amazing movie. This is the top of the food chain type shit. A movie that leaves something with you. It's something you're going to gush over for a while, and one that you won't shut the fuck up about to your friends and family for weeks. A near perfect movie. Honestly, a 9 out of 10 is like my 10 out of 10. It's a movie that you can put on almost every day and never ever get bored of watching. These are the kind of movies that people say are their favorite movies of all time. Sure, some 8s might slip onto those lists, but for the most part, the best movies ever made will fall under this category. And finally, a 10 is a perfect movie. But unfortunately, those simply do not exist. Not in my opinion, at least. I don't think I've ever watched a single movie where not a single scene stood out to me or dragged. Every movie, no matter how great or amazing it is, has at least one hiccup that prevents it from being a truly perfect movie. Besides, I don't really think perfection even exists within movies anyway. No matter how iconic or beloved a movie is, chances are it is not a completely impervious movie. If it ain't perfect through and through, it is not a 10 out of 10. Which is fun anyway, in my opinion. I've always liked the idea of the potential of a 10 out of 10 movie existing, but never being done. Again, just my opinion. So, chances are you'll never see a 1 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 on this channel. And that's it. That's how I personally rate movies. And please, comment down below your own personal rating scales. I'm actually very interested in that. Again, subscribe if you're interested in the MCU retrospective series coming up soon. And if not, please check out my other videos. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.